to What Med Media. Thanks so much for joining. I'm Dr. Kishan Rees, and that's very formal, but my name's Kishan, and I, as many of you know, have been doing this for many years now. Also, regular viewers of the page will know that I'm currently undergoing recovery and convalescence from a traumatic brain injury when I fell off my bike or suffered an uncontrolled dismount, as they say. And what I'd like to do in this video is talk about a Telegraph article that's just come up, which is, I was just checking in on the news. Evening, Barbara. Evening, Carolyn. 14 people joined. If you could please share this. It's going to be quite a short video, but it's covering a really important topic, and it's going to be around brain injury and neuro rehab. Because the Telegraph article that I saw, written by Jeremy Wilson, their chief sports reporter, today at 7:30, so it's breaking really, it's only an hour and a quarter ago, is women have double the risk of suffering brain injury in football and rugby. Women and girls are at double risk of suffering brain injury in football and rugby despite playing exactly the same rules as men, MPs were told on Tuesday. What's your experience of this, and what's your take on this discussion and this debate? Because it really is quite important. We'll know that incidentally, some of the 1970 members of England's World Cup team were only taken seriously when their peers from the 1966 World Cup winning team were actually diagnosed with dementia early. And the thing around that is around chronic micro-trauma causing actually damage to the brain. So obviously I have a real interest in this in terms of overcoming a traumatic brain injury. Hey, how you doing? It does make for interesting reading. Do you fancy coming on and talking about it? Why don't we do that? So I'm going to keep going, and I'm like, if you'd like to see Em in the comments make her third, I was going to say debut, but it's not debut, appearance, I would suggest. That could be fun. In evidence that raises fresh questions of sports governing bodies and their concussion protocols, Parliament was told that men were often being prioritised in the provision of medical care and that there was an absence of research in women's sport. Terrible, isn't it? Obviously, the male game is seen by some as more important. Obviously, I don't think that's the case at all. But if it's distilling down to the point that it's affecting research as well, this is a really important thing that we need to talk about. While the rules for women's and men's football are exactly the same, the risk of concussion in women's football is about twice that as of men's, says Dr. Willie Stewart, a consultant neuropathologist from the University of Glasgow. So the risk of brain injury is double, and that repeats itself through rugby and various other sports where the rules are exactly the same. We definitely have a concern about the long-term consequences that might be. If you're twice as high risk of developing a symptomatic brain injury, what does that mean many years down the line? We really need to get ahead with that research. Alex Davies Jones, an MP who sits on the Parliamentary Committee for Digital Culture, Media and Sport, described these differences as quite shocking, quote unquote, and following considerable growth in women's football and rugby, asked what could be done with protocols. I'd be really interested in terms of anybody who's viewing and they participate in recreational sport at weekends, jumpers for goalposts type thing. I don't know what the rugby analogy is. Always remember, I can't remember, I think it was on Soccer AM, where they were talking about how exciting in terms of rugby, because it's a funny egg-shaped ball and you don't know which direction it's going to bounce when you run after it. I think you know which side of the fence I am in terms of football and rugby, but regardless. Hello, Cecilia. Hello, Cara. How you doing? Em, I'm hoping to come to you in a sec. I'm going to ask you to come on camera because I'd love to have a discussion about this with you if you're free. If not, anyone else wants to come on camera, fancy saying hello, send me a request and I'll let you on. Here we go. So, Dr. Stewart replied by referencing startling differences in forthcoming research between how brain injuries were handled. There are obviously biological differences which may contribute to this, he said. We've also got some evidence that at adolescent level there may be a difference in mechanism of injury and also a difference in the approach of management of injuries. I think we should ask questions of whether we are focusing attention in the right place. I couldn't agree more. Also, I think we also need to ask quite difficult questions in terms of whether we're actually focusing attention. Hello, Richard. How you doing? Hello, Isabel. Thanks for joining. So I completely agree with that. If a school or club or physio doctor are available on a Saturday afternoon and there are a couple of matches on, they should be standing on the sidelines of the ladies' game, because that's where the injury, in terms of brain injury, is going to happen. That's so true. Didn't even think of it that way. But inevitably, what they're doing is standing on the sidelines of the men's game. I don't think we're giving it nearly enough attention, says Dr. Stewart. And I think that's a good point as well, isn't it? Because it's like you look at men's sport and you think, oh, more powerful, more impactful, more physical. But if there is a biological difference between the female and the male brain, then surely that from an equality and equity point of view, there should be physios and medical support in both men's and women's games. I don't know. Actually, no, I do know. Of course, there should be. But anyway, so we're going down to that. The parliamentary inquiry follows the legal action that is being taken by a group of former professional men's rugby players who have been diagnosed with early onset dementia, as well as research led by Dr. Stewart, which showed that professional footballers are 3.5 times more likely to die of neurodegenerative disease. Dr. Stewart said that was sufficient evidence for football to reduce exposure to heading on the balance of probabilities of its risk. He also described the incidence rate of concussion in men's professional rugby as still totally unacceptable. Richard Boardman of Rylands Law, who's representing more than 150 current and former rugby union players in the legal action, said that parliamentary scrutiny was long overdue, given the scale of the problem as evidenced by the number of players coming forward, not just in rugby union, but in rugby league and football. Now is not the time the time for governing bodies to maintain their ostrich-like approach. Hayley McQueen, the daughter of former Scotland, Manchester United, Leeds United and St Mirren defender Gordon McQueen, who has recently been diagnosed with dementia, wants immediate restrictions on heading in training. Couldn't agree more. Comment from Michael, thank you. There are a number of rugby union players taking action against rugby unions because of head injuries. Michael, if you want to come on and have a chat, it says you're camera positive. So who knows? I might try that in a sec. We now know, and someone will be to blame if we don't do something about it, says Hayley. I think there needs to be changes in the law within football governing bodies as to how much a player heads the ball, and not just at under 11s level. Everybody needs to know about it. So I completely agree. I'm very interested in it. Let's try and add somebody into the conversation. Here we go. Suspense is almost too much. Adding, it says. How exciting. Hello. How you doing?
I'm not too bad, thank you. How are you?
Thank you very much for this, by the way.
You're very welcome.
Sadly, it's not going to protect from a brain injury, but I love it. It's very good. So, what's your thoughts on that?
Having played football through school and rugby at uni, I can see why. There's no differentiation between the male sport and female, thankfully, apart from the reffing, perhaps. So the contact element of it, that is really going to be as detrimental to women. I think the interesting thing is just how this will play out in the media. I mean, this was raised, I'm looking at the moment at The Guardian, who raised this on Christmas Eve. Although at that point it was maybe even greater for women than men. And it was just when this sort of, as Nick had said, there's an awful lot of rugby union players who are coming to the fore, and obviously the sad demise of several of the team from '66 in the football arena really is starting to show just exactly how brutal these sports are on your body. Now, don't get me wrong, they are fantastic to watch, they're brilliant to play. I just feel that perhaps, iterative learning, looking at protectionism, we always laugh at the Americans. I watch the NFL. They are seeing a rise of concussion injuries, and they wear padding. Now, whether they are stronger in tackles, whether they are better at rotating players off the pitch, who knows? But I think there's a lot of post-match care that goes on perhaps at lower league clubs. I know for one of the lads I know who plays up at Ilkley, he was stretched off with concussion, and they were exceptionally cautious with him going back onto the pitch after about 3 months, I think it was. They were really checking to make sure that he was not suffering any long-term damage.
So that's really interesting.
Whether that's the same in high leagues, I don't know. I haven't experienced
it. In the high leagues, I can obviously only comment from watching it and like reading the reports in the media, because I'm not involved in elite sport in that way. It's just watching it. But in higher sports, you have things like players wanting to shake it off and arguing with the doctors, wanting to go and get back on the pitch, and that's sort of almost like a different angle on it completely. But what I would say certainly is considering I'm undergoing recovery from a traumatic head injury, which kind of puts me in quite an interesting place to comment on this. I genuinely was trying to shake it off, not take it seriously. Oh, it's fine. I'm okay. Look, I bounced. I survived. And it's only now that I'm starting to feel the absolute knock-on effects of that, and looking to optimize everything that I can, like whether it be diet, exercise, sleep, everything. So I think there is this element that young people say nothing's going to harm me, and then society only looks at it when role models get to the point and they're 50 or 60 and they're getting dementia maybe 20, 30 years ahead of time. So there's obviously a lag in this, and partly that's people doing the sports saying, actually, I'm fine, I want to, whether that be at amateur or elite level, but also, as you quite rightly said, from a media perspective as well. So I mean, would you, argument's sake, would you want to ban heading in football? What does it really add to the game?
Oh God. Now, you see, I'm torn with that question significantly because I'm an avid football fan. I can see less of an impact now, pardon the pun, due to the technology that's involved with the actual hardware that they're dealing with. Footballs are no longer leather in the same.
Saying that, I read something about that though, in terms of it was 14 to 16 ounces, and there was this fallacy that, they said it was a fallacy in the sense that back in the day they were saying the footballs were heavier and they would soak up more water. But then the thing is when they were heavier and they were wet, no, you couldn't really kick it as high, so the impact wasn't as much. And the weight has apparently, I think it was The Conversation, I read this piece, that saying that the weight has remained consistent between 14 and 16 ounces. And even the older, heavier balls, they're actually saying that the repeat micro trauma of doing this from a young age all the way through, we're only probably going to see the impacts of it now. So,
yes.
Yeah.
I mean,
thank you, Matilda.
You could, I suppose it's a long leap from it, but could this be the cause of things like motor neuron disease? Could this be through the exploration of traumatic head injury due to sports, we will see perhaps greater leaps scientifically to understand more.
I hope so. I think I really hope so, because the only real research into this at the moment is from a military perspective and traumatic head injuries on the battlefield. And as with many advances in medicine, to be fair, I've got military roots in that regard. So yes, I hope so. That would be really good, I think. I don't know has anyone else got any questions? Otherwise, I'm going to just. It's 9 o'clock. I'm going to go to bed. In terms of my my
yes. Well, sadly, this is what you have to do when you have neurological deficiencies. You have to take care of yourself in a completely different way, and perhaps maybe the optimization of nutrition at an early age, the strategies of making yourself better as opposed to removing things from sport. Could it marry hand in hand? Could it be brought forward could there be greater stringent tests pitch side before players go on, rather than having this, as you say, machismo that comes on from shaking it off? Breed a different culture, swap a player out, change the rules suggestively. Don't get me wrong, I'm a Rangers fan and I love my football. I'll not admit that I'm a Villa fan to your fans, but I'll definitely claim the Jers. But you know, to see it go through the ages, I think, you know, we've certainly got 20 years ahead to actually start seeing.
Do you not think it's a crying? Sorry, I was going to say, do you not think it's a crying shame, the fact that the billions of pounds that are in sport knocking around, slashing around, and I'm sure it wasn't mentioned in that article, but I bet funding for this research is probably not at the forefront of lots of people's minds. Yeah. So yeah, how interesting. Well, I'm sure we'll do more on this. I'm literally going to go to bed. I just felt like I'd come on. I'm glad you came on though, so thank you very much. Good to see you. You got some love from Richard in the comments, which is always positive. And yeah, we'll pick up soon, no doubt.
Cheers. Bye now.
Cool. Cheers. Take care. See you soon. Bye bye.